Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of the Nasty Talks. In today's episode, we are talking with Natali. She has been on the podcast before. Natali is a certified coach and is studying to become a psychologist. Today's episode is about sexual abuse, and we will be talking about two types of abusers, pedophiles and psychopaths. So, without further ado, Natali, everybody. Welcome, Natali, on the podcast.
Hi, Nicolette. I'm happy to be back here.
Natali will be talking with us about sexual abuse. And can you tell us a little bit about your professional background and what you have been working with?
Yeah, sure. Previous episodes, we spoke already about me being a life coach and relationship coach. But also I worked as a counselor for victims of abuse for the Social Insurance Board of Estonia. So I was like a governmental worker. And in this podcast, majority of my experience will be coming from the second one, because most exposure I had to sexual abuse or any kind of abuse was during that time when I was working there. As a life coach, it's more of gaslighting or more of mutual abuse like we spoke in the last episode. Maybe some of my clients were victims of abuse, but they've never brought it up. Or if they did, we never really worked on that because I'm not qualified. So that is a very important distinguishment to make.
Okay. How often did you had sexual abuse in your cases when you were a counselor?
I can say it was quite common, unfortunately. I would maybe say in 80-70% of cases. And there it was very hard to distinguish because what statistics says is that 99% of victims of sexual abuse will never speak up about their traumatic experience, unfortunately, because there is a lot of shame and guilt around this topic. Nonetheless, very specific people, specific mindset and upbringing, and with specific experiences from childhood become victims of abuse. And I'm telling this not to shame them or victim blame them, but to kind of create a portrait of a typical victim of abuse. And usually these are people who didn't have a lot of love, affection, attention from their parents, who didn't have close connection, who didn't have trusting relationship, who didn't communicate. And if we're talking about sexual abuse, then these children usually never had proper sexual education. They didn't know what sex means. And unfortunately, later on, it affected them in a way that they, for the lack of self-core, strong core and self-confidence and self-awareness and awareness about sex, they became victims of this kind of abuse.
That is actually so much. 99% of people that don't talk about it that have actually experienced it. In your perception, what do you think there could be done in order for these victims to talk about their problems and talk about what they have been through?
Well, first, I want to say that we need to really change our vocabulary and our perception and approach to such situations as a whole society, because it is very prevalent in society to victim blame. For example, such phrases as, oh yeah, you are wearing a very short skirt and this is why he harassed you, or this is why he abused you, or yeah, you looked like a slut anyways, or yeah, you were drunk, so this is why it happened to you. This kind of vocabulary should be gone, and situations like sexual abuse, such traumatic experiences, they should be treated with tremendous amount of tenderness and gentleness. It is not a topic to provoke, to talk harshly about. And I generally have this rule of thumb that I follow in my life as a professional and as a human being. I think it's very important for more people to acquire it, is that we need to treat people gently, because we never know what they have experienced in their life before meeting us. And I'm not saying it to promote not speaking out for yourself, not protecting your boundaries, or being obedient, or being always likable. I'm not talking about that. Being likable and having this mask of a good person is very different from treating people with gentleness. That is one. Second, normal people should talk more about such traumatic experiences. And definitely people who have experienced sexual abuse, I highly recommend to speak to a professional, preferably a psychotherapist, because getting out of this traumatic event and healing alone is impossible. So speaking out with tenderness and care and gentleness, or speaking about your traumatic experience, is definitely what I would recommend.
Most of the times when we think about sexual abuse, we do think about women. But have you had any experiences with men being sexually abused or children?
Unfortunately, yes, a lot of cases of child sexual abuse. And there it's not related to gender, it's both boys and girls. And usually these victims, they are victims of pedophiles or maniacs. And we definitely should talk about the difference between both. Men, I have not had cases of men being sexually abused, but from my colleagues, I've heard their cases that there are young men who are of homosexual sexual orientation. They are more prone to be victims of this kind of abuse because they're more vulnerable. And for men, I would say there is a flavor of self-abuse when it comes to sexual abuse. And if you really dissect it and dive deeper, it is when men feel the pressure to perform or to be alpha or to always want sex. And this is when they agree to have sex and they decide to act on it despite their desire not to. But this is called auto-aggression or self-abuse more than direct sexual abuse.
Yeah, because it's a societal belief that they should always want to have sex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, really, if you see deeper into this, it comes from childhood abuse, usually from suppression, again, from lack of connection to the body, to themselves, lack of understanding of sexuality, and having no sexual education whatsoever, not understanding their own boundaries. So it's all connected.
Yeah. But getting into this mindset of wanting to abuse somebody, what do you think is in the mind of an abuser? What do you think can drive somebody to do such a thing?
Okay, and here we start talking about pedophiles and maniacs. And it's a very deep topic. I would like to cover it thoroughly so that there is understanding.
Yes, thank you.
If we're talking about child sexual abuse, or actually any aggressive rape, there is a big difference between pedophiles, what is a classical portrait of a pedophile, and a maniac or a rapist. So let me start first describing you the typical picture of pedophiles. Obviously, there are exceptions to the cases, but this is the, let's say, typical picture. Usually pedophiles become such either because of their genetics, and this is related to psychopathy, or because of severe trauma, a lot of traumatic events at a certain stage in their childhood. And typical pedophile is usually the second. So typical pedophiles often have been victims of sexual abuse as a child, and they are basically being stuck in this age. Their psychocognitive development just stops there because of how traumatic events were. And typical pedophiles have romantic feelings towards a child. Pedophilia is having sexual desire and romantic feelings towards a childish body. And pedophilia is kind of might be considered as sexual orientation. And here I need to say that these people, they understand that something is not right with them. And usually it's a lifelong battle for them to fight this sexual desire towards children. And these people, they're usually very insecure, very cowardly, and typical pedophiles will almost never aggressively rape a child. They might caress the hair, they might touch, they might try to incline a child towards a sexual act, but it will be very held back and cowardly. It is still abuse, it is still not right, and there is no explanation and justification of trying anything sexual with a child, and there is definitely no consent in that. What I also want to say is that cases of sexual abuse in childhood, very often, majority of cases happens within the family. So it can be stepfathers, uncles, brothers, also female, like aunts, family friends, or teachers, coaches, doctors, nurses at school, things like that. So this is a typical profile of a pedophile. And what I want to say, what cherry on top, is that pedophiles, like I said, are aware of this problem and they struggle with it the whole life. And usually they lean towards such methods as chemical castration or very heavy drugs to suppress their libido. Because pedophiles are stuck in a certain level of development, they're very childish themselves, and it's indeed very hard for them to build relationships with adults. If they are married or if they are in a relationship, it will probably be a very asexual relationship where, let's say, a spouse of such pedophile will have a figure of authority, kind of like a parent, or they might be also very infantile and they will be absolutely clueless of what's happening with their spouse, who is a pedophile. And then now we move on to rapists, maniacs. Whenever there is an aggressive act of rape, and it's not cowardly a shaking hand that is trying to touch the hair of a child, when it's aggressive, and when these people act very fast on their decisions, they are very confident, we equal them to psychopaths. And for a psychopath, it is not about being sexually attracted to the body of a child. They do not care about that at all. What they care about is feeling dominance, taking. They usually get pleasure from somebody's suffering. And the grade of sadism or the level of sadism is very high. And this is their motivation. Yeah, so their motivation is not to feel romantically attracted and develop romantic feelings toward the child. Their motive is to dominate. They usually do not feel guilt for what they've done. And like I said, they're very quick to act on their desires. And when we talk about psychopaths, this is something that is either inborn or acquired environmentally or both, but from a very young age. Just like pedophilia, it cannot be treated, but they are very different things. Psychopaths are people who are stuck in the most primitive, the lowest level of psychocognitive development, which is equals to about 1.5 years old as a child. So they see the world as giving plate that owes them. And that is a massive difference between a picture of a typical pedophile, isn't it? Yeah, so cases can be very different depending on who we're dealing with.
Yeah. And who do you think, you said before that people that are normally victims of sexual abuse are people that are searching for this kind of love and recognition from other people. Is there any kind of other behavior for which some people could be sexually abused?
Well, very rarely it happens that it's random from the street. But still, even there, these people, pedophiles and especially psychopaths, their understanding of emotions is almost specifically tuned to feel a person who is potentially their victim, who has a specific persona, specific personality, so to say. And here again, I want to repeat, it is not to blame the victim at all. It is really about making sure that if you have children, you provide them with love, acknowledgement, recognition, care, you have trusting relationship with them, you communicate with them about different topics, and you start sexual education early on, really early. There are such basic things for kids to know what real names of genitals are. It's not how it is said in my language, in Russian, it's not a dumpling for a female vulva, or it's not a cookie, or it's not a pie. It's vulva. Vulva is the top part, vagina is the inner part, and children need to know the names, proper anatomical names of their genitalia, just like they know, oh, I have 5 fingers on my left hand, and I can name all of them. I have a nose, I have 2 ears, and I also have penis or vulva, and girls also have vagina, and I have anus. And why is it important? It is important because when something, God forbid, happens to your child, they know how to communicate to you and to professionals of what has happened to them. It sounds very sad, but I've heard of cases in my work where a girl was trying to say that her cousin was trying to take away her cookie. And parents didn't understand what it meant. Like, cookie? What do you mean? What cookie? And she was trying to tell them that actually her cousin was abusing her sexually.
Oh my God.
And it's very common. Then the second thing that really needs to be talked about at 3 years old, like it's as early as 3 years old, is the basic rule of underwear. And it means that whatever is covered by their panties is their intimate part of body, and nobody is allowed to touch it without permission. Only the doctor and the parent can, but they need to get permission, for example. This is the basic rule of underwear. Things like that. And also explaining what sex is appropriately to their age. And I will cite the formula and I will dissect it and explain why is it important. The correct way of explaining sex to children early on is sex is an act of two adult people that love each other, and they do this to get pleasure and get closer, get intimate. So let me dissect it. Sex is a pleasant act, so it's supposed to be pleasant, of adult people, adult, right? That is consensual and that is to connect. This is the explanation of sex to children. So they understand that when something like this happens to them, they know it's not right. And instead of freezing, what often happens to victims of sexual abuse, and feeling like they are guilty and it's them to shame of what has happened, or not even understanding exactly of what has happened, just feeling disgust, they will scream and shout and call for help. That's a big difference.
Yes. Thank you very much for saying all this. I think it's so important for a lot of people a lot of parents to know how to talk with their kids about sex. Because as a parent, I think it's so hard to really put yourself into the mind of a kid and really know how to explain this. How is it useful for my kid to know this? And how is the best way for me to do it? And I think this is a great way to do it.
Well, here I can be a bit harsh. I'll try not to, since it's a gentle topic. But really, if you are a parent, please work through your own shame around this topic. Educate yourself about sexuality. And please, really, for the sake of your child, try to explain it. Because there is no other way.
Yeah. When we talk about sexual abuse in the sense that it is non-consensual, have you had any situations in which the aggressor thought that it was consensual, but it actually wasn't?
Well, in fact, psychopaths always feel like what they're doing is consensual. They think that what they're doing, kids also enjoy. So the big difference about being a psychopath or not being a psychopath is the lack of empathy. These people definitely do not feel like something is wrong, and they feel that it's enjoyable for both parties. But when we talk about less heavier stuff, quote unquote, it happens, of course, that people do not speak out. And it goes to very simple and very basic things. One of the partners, usually a female, for example, experiences unpleasant feelings during intercourse, or pain, or like there is not enough lubrication, or that maybe she hasn't been warmed up enough yet, and then she decides to go for sex anyways, for different reasons. This is self-abuse, and this is also very abusive.
But from your perspective, does consent always have to be verbal? Do you always have to verbalize that you want to have sex, or is it enough to show certain cues, maybe from the way you move or the way you look, or some other aspect?
Definitely it is only verbal. And here I really want to, first, it's very therapeutic for all of us to speak up and speak out loud of what we really feel and think and want or don't want, because not many of us do it, unfortunately. And second, there is no way another person will read your mind. We don't have this superpower. Let's rewind to a situation where I was describing when during intercourse a female might feel pain. So at first she was really excited about sex, for example, but then something went wrong, or I don't know, like whatever happened, and she feels pain. Shouldn't she say out loud that she feels pain, or how her partner is supposed to understand that she feels pain?
Of course, that is very important. And what do you think might hold people back from doing that?
Usually it's a bouquet of factors. One of them is feeling the lack of self-authority and reliance to the self, which I refer to as strong core, where opinion of somebody else and what they think and feel is more important than yours. And it is connected to lack of understanding of self-boundaries. It is also related to externalizing your self-worth, which means my self-worth is based on external factors, like what others think of me, what others say of me, how others see me. And also, a very important one is having lack of connection and knowledge of your body.
And what do you think is the main, like the most common coping mechanism that people have after they have been sexually abused?
I would highlight 3 main consequences. One is unstable psyche. Second is not having reliance to the self, so making somebody else an authority in your life.
Yeah.
And the third one is lack of connection to the body, to their body. Oftentimes, unfortunately, victims of abuse will devalue their experience as if it's not important what has happened to them, and they will deny any influence of this traumatic event to their life.
Yeah. Is that something that it's easy to see if you are coaching somebody or if you are trying to help somebody from a professional point of view? Is that something that shines through?
It depends on each case. And here I'm talking about my experience as a counselor. But as a coach, I want to emphasize I do not deal with cases of sexual abuse because I'm not a psychotherapist. I do work with mindset and beliefs. I do work with actions and patterns and making them better or developing certain habits, but I do not work with the root cause. I cannot work with helping healing sexual abuse because I'm not a therapist. So, but when we talk about recognition, like I said, the general rule of thumb that people are usually very suppressed. They do not know how to express what they feel. They don't even know maybe what they feel. Usually they are very obedient. They do not follow their own authority. I actually want to bring up a very recent example. If you have watched a movie of Elvis Presley, about Elvis Presley, in this movie you can see how poor Elvis, really poor Elvis, didn't have reliance to the self. He was suppressed. He was in toxic relationships with his parents. The most toxic relationship was apparently with his manager, who was, in my view, who is a total psychopath. And you can see how Elvis totally lost himself. And this tragedy, what happened to him, and early death, happened to him because he didn't have strong self-authority. And in a movie, there is a very bright scene where him, Elvis, and his friend B.B. King, they're sitting on a balcony and they're talking about relationships with Elvis's manager. And B.B. King talks totally different about himself and how he would manage the situation. And it shows that he has very strong authority within himself. And Elvis doesn't. And you really can follow through this whole pattern throughout the whole movie. So if you really want an example that is recent and that is very interesting, and I think the production is amazing, is watch a movie Elvis. It's really, it's depicted so brightly there.
Okay, thank you very much. I will also link it down below in the episode for people to be able to check it out. And how do you think that one deals with their intimacy after having a sexual abuse?
Well, usually there is no intimacy. Victims of sexual abuse usually are afraid of building relationships because they cannot trust, because they couldn't trust their parents, or when they trusted their parents, it didn't work. You know, they didn't get love, they didn't get attention, they didn't get closeness. And the act of sexual abuse itself tells about not trusting people. So it's extremely hard for them to build relationships. And usually they avoid it. They run away from it. And this is exactly an example of when people might think that it doesn't affect them, but it actually does. And they might explain it to themselves in different ways, but in reality, it is a consequence of sexual abuse.
Yeah. Okay. And how do you work with that in coaching or in psychology?
Well, in coaching, you don't work with that. That I want to highlight. When I was a counselor, my main role was to actually holding space for them and making it very safe and secure, and trying to bring it to their attention that it's not their fault, and also allowing them to express whichever feelings they wanted to, because usually they do not know how to express anger and aggression. In psychotherapy, I cannot comment as a therapist because I'm not a therapist yet, although I'm studying. But let's say if I refer to my own case of sexual abuse, like I shared in the previous episode, for me, my therapy was about really building my strong core, really understanding who I am and what is right for me and what is wrong for me, building my boundaries, developing the skill to say no, even developing the understanding of how I feel in the moment, and building boundaries and understanding it's not my fault. So working with guilt and shame. Such simple things as, let's say, feeling my body when I want to go to a toilet, actually going to a toilet right away and not postponing it, is already a big step. Or feeling when I want to eat and eating. Or when I don't want to eat and not eating when I don't want to eat. Such simple things of connecting to my body again, that was a big part. And like I said, boundaries, strong core, self-awareness, all of that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And do you have any final thoughts for this subject?
Final thoughts are like a summary, that it's a very tragic yet very important topic, and it needs to be talked about, but with care and love and gentleness, and that sexual education is very important, and generally educating the self a little bit about psychology and knowing who are pedophiles, who are psychopaths, how to recognize them, and when you recognize them, running away from them is extremely important. And for those who have ever suffered sexual abuse or any kind of abuse really, please seek help to a psychologist, psychotherapist.
Thank you. Thank you very much for talking about this topic. I know it is a hard topic for maybe people that are going through something or have gone through something like this, such as you. But I hope it will create a little bit more understanding for everybody in who is a psychopath, who is a person that might want to hurt them if it's not consensual, and how to deal with something like this. And thank you for being here and sharing all your information about this.
Thank you for having me, Nicoletta.
If you or anybody that you know has ever been sexually abused, please seek help to a psychologist or a psychotherapist. And if you have any questions related to this topic, I will link Natali's Instagram in the description so you can reach out. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe to our channel to not miss any of our future episodes. And until next time, take care and stay nasty.